Hello chums, and welcome to episode 4 of the Mid-2000s Supercar Shootout, where I gather some of the most desirable motor vehicles from 20 years ago and subject them to a series of challenges. The 14 contenders have now been through 6 tests across the first 3 videos, being rated on their top speed, fuel economy, acceleration, braking, lap time, and their subjective driving feel. If you haven't yet seen those videos, I highly recommend doing so. To summarise what's happened so far, the top speed test had some fairly obvious results, with the Veyron, Enzo and Corvette making up the top 3, while the Ford GT impressed by coming in 4th. The Lamborghini Gallardo was the only real surprise, with its close ratio gearbox making it one of the slowest cars here. The fuel economy test threw up some more varied results. It was mostly a reverse of the top speed test, except for the Lamborghini Gallardo, which again scored no points, while the Corvette and to a much greater extent the Ford GT and Dodge Viper achieved excellent fuel economy. In episode 2 I ran a standing start test, adding the 0 to 60, 0 to 100 and 400 meter times together to give points based on the lowest overall time. The Gallardo finally scored points, coming in 3rd overall, while the usual heavy hitters took the rest of the top spots. The biggest shock here was the Mercedes-Benz SLR, underperforming and scoring no points. I then ran a braking test from 150 miles per hour, which the SLR won, while the Ford GT scored no points for the first time. In episode 3, the supercars were sent around one of Lake Maggiore's shortened variations for a time trial. Annoyingly, the Bugatti won despite being utterly atrocious to drive. The Gallardo came an impressive 4th, while the Mercedes SLR once again underperformed, only just beating the Dodge Viper. I then rated each car based on subjective driving feel, which isn't really anything more than my irrelevant opinion. Either way, the SLR redeemed itself for being an absolute hoot to drive, while the Murcielago scored points on its sound, and the Ferrari F430 Scuderia outperformed for being one of the best all-rounders. So far there is only one car that has scored points in every single round, and that is the Chevrolet Corvette, which is the cheapest car here, aside from the TVI Tuscan. So, what have we got today? So far we've had 3 videos on these cars, and I haven't upgraded a single thing on any of them. For the next part of this series, I have upgraded each of the 14 cars to set them up for 700 performance points. I've tweaked each car using a similar methodology. I've fitted the custom LST, suspension, and manual gearbox, because I prefer it to the racing transmission on these builds. From there, each car has the wide body, aftermarket wheels, racing hard tyres, and max aero options fitted. For each car, I've maxed out the rear downforce and set the front to a fairly low value of around 100, which typically reduces the performance point rating, which then allows for more horsepower, whilst increasing stability. I've also added ballast weight to either get closer to a 50-50 weight distribution, or add traction to the driven wheels depending on the car. This tuning methodology will typically result in a car that can feel quite numb and prone to understeer, but it typically results in a car that's faster overall. Alternatively, you can increase front downforce for some better cornering at the expense of having to limit the power more. From there, I've experimented with various tuning parts to figure out which gives the best power at a certain performance point rating. For example, some cars benefit from having the high lift camshaft, crankshaft and titanium conrods fitted, followed by limiting power, because it reduces torque. Other cars benefit from having the high RPM turbo kit fitted, because it shifts the torque curve upwards and allows more power at the same performance point rating. There are 3 exceptions though: the Enzo, Carrera GT and the Veyron. Since these 3 cars are still subject to the preposterous invitation system, all 3 are fully upgraded with every single part available, and then limited back to 700 performance points, because most people won't have the luxury of buying multiple copies of these cars to experiment with not using permanent parts. So all of that is a very long-winded way of saying I've spent time with each car trying to set them up in a way that gives them all the best chance possible. Let's reintroduce our contenders with their new liveries. Our current last place contender is the Audi R8, which may be able to redeem itself now that the supercars are on a more level playing field. The Team PlayStation livery adds at least 1000 horsepower, and the turbo kit allows the Audi to run almost 60 horsepower more than naturally aspirated at this particular rating. In terms of power to weight ratio, this is now one of the heaviest hitters. Just ahead of it in the standings is the Alfa Romeo 8C. The Old Spice livery is a mixture of a touring car livery from an Alfa 155 and a mod for Assetto Corsa that I found on a Google search. The Dodge Viper SRT10 now ranks as one of the most powerful cars in the roster with 677 horsepower. The livery is inspired by a Scale X-Trick model that I used to have when I was a teenager. With much less power, we have the Porsche 911 GT3 gussied up in the Tyre racing livery. It has one of the worst power to weight ratios here, but as we saw in the lap time challenge, the Porsche always punches above its weight. The resident underdog is next. The TVR Tuscan is yet again the lightest car here, and it's also the least powerful by quite a margin. It'll be interesting to see if its low weight can finally be used to its advantage. The livery is inspired by the Cerberus LM edition from Gran Turismo 1 and 2. Next up is the overachieving Ford GT. With 650 horsepower, this is likely to be the new top speed king thanks to its slippery aerodynamics. The livery is based on the Robertson Racing Ford GT entered into the American Le Mans series. The Ferrari 430 Scuderia ranks as one of the less powerful cars here, but it still has a downforce advantage over many of its rivals. With this Red Bull livery, hopefully I'll be driving it a bit more like Verstappen and a bit less like whoever the victim in the number 2 seat is this week. One of the only cars that had to be detuned is the Chevrolet Corvette. I tried out multiple different combinations of tuning parts, but the one that allowed the most power was fitting the camshaft, crankshaft and conrods to increase power and revs without increasing torque. Limiting power back then reduces torque, allowing slightly more power, but the Corvette still finds itself at a disadvantage. The Lamborghini Gallardo has a similar quirk to the Audi R8, in that adding a turbo kit allows you to run more power. In the previous video, I said that this car felt like it had the most grip if you take downforce out of the equation, but most of these cars now have similar downforce levels, so this could become the best handling car here, possibly. The Mercedes-Benz SLR has performed quite terribly so far, with a couple of sporadic tests redeeming it slightly. Its biggest Achilles heel was the weight, but it's now been on a 400 kg diet, so hopefully we'll see more of its potential. A car that doesn't appear to have any disadvantage is the Porsche Carrera GT. It weighs less than the SLR and has more power. Some of the more eagle-eyed viewers may be able to recognise the livery on this car, which is an inverted variant of the Salzburg livery found on the old 917. With slightly more power and a heck of a lot more weight, the Lamborghini Murcielago sports a very predictable livery. It also sports rather a lot of weight, something I'm not entirely sure its V12 soundtrack can cancel out this time. Next up, we have one of the most nerfed cars here. The Ferrari Enzo loses about 100 horsepower, now making it one of the least powerful cars here. It also has a ridiculous amount of rear downforce, which may turn it into a total understeer whore. We'll see if a Michael Schumacher-inspired livery will help its chances. And last up, we have the resident fat bastard. The Bugatti Veyron has had 200 horsepower removed to bring it down to 700 performance points, though it has also had a rather intensive diet. Despite that, it's still the tubbiest car here by far. The livery, meanwhile, is from a Bugatti EB110 that was entered into Le Mans in the 1990s. It was way cooler than this Veyron, but it also performed terribly because it has 4 turbo, so it wasn't reliable. So we now have 14 race cars. What do we test first? You may have noticed I never tested the tyre wear for the supercars without modifications. That's because it's unlikely that people will enter races that have tyre wear in unmodified cars. I figured that running this test at 700 performance points would actually tell you something a tad more useful. In order to test each car, I've set up a custom race at the Nürburgring sprint course. Equal conditions mode is on, so there's no wind or temperature changes. Tyre wear, meanwhile, is set at the maximum ×50 multiplier. In this test, I will measure the distance covered before the first tyre, in this case the front left, completely runs out of tread. I will then measure the distance until the last tyre runs out of tread. Each value will then be multiplied by 50 to get a more accurate idea of how long the tyres will last. So the Audi R8 went first. The first tyre died after covering 6.4 miles, and then the last tyre lost its tread at 12.2 miles. So, if we multiply those two numbers by 50, we get 320 miles for the first tyre and 610 for the last. To give this car a score, I will take the first tyre distance and I will halve the last tyre distance, because who's realistically driving a car on 4 dead tyres? So, the score for the R8 is 320 for the first tyre, plus 305, half of the last tyre, for a total of 625 points. The Alfa Romeo 8C went next, with the first tyre running out of tread at 365 miles, which is better than the Audi. The last tyre didn't go quite so far though, but the overall score is still an improvement at 642.5. The Dodge Viper, meanwhile, covered 325 miles for the first tyre. Coupled with the score for the last tyre, its total is only 615. The Porsche 911 GT3 covered 350 miles before its first tyre was gone. And with the score from the last tyre, it gets the same overall score as the Alfa Romeo at 642.5. The lightweight TVR goes next, and it covers a much more impressive 395 miles for the front tyre, but the rear tyres don't last that long at all. The total is still an improvement at 662.5. The Ferrari 430 puts in a good performance, almost matching the Tuscan for the front tyre, but the rears lasted a fair bit longer. It just about edges out the TVR with a total score of 667.5. The Ford GT puts in a more average performance, covering a respectable 365 miles on the front tyre, but the rears wore out almost as quickly as the Tuscan. The score is 635. The Corvette goes next, and being front-engined and torque-heavy, I expected a below-average score, but it matched the Ferrari 430 at 380 miles on the front tyre, while the rear tyres lasted much longer than expected. So we have a new leader with a total score of 730. The Gallardo brings us back down to earth with 320 miles for the front tyres and an average wear rate for the rear tyres. The Gallardo matches the Viper in joint last so far with a score of 615. Not to worry though, the SLR is here to lower the bar. While the front tyres will cover the same 320 miles or so, its insane weight and torque will melt the rear tyres faster, so the total score is 580. Not great. The Porsche Carrera GT is next, and it's a mixed bag. The front tyres wore out the slowest of every car here, covering 420 miles, but the rear tyres were among some of the quickest to wear out. A total score of 702.5 leaves it second, behind the Chevrolet. The Lamborghini Murcielago followed, and it's got some of the heaviest front tyre wear of the bunch, covering only 310 miles. The rears fared much better, but it's not enough to compete with a total score of 600. The Ferrari Enzo is one of the last here to attack its tyres. It has some of the best overall tyre wear, with the fronts covering 380 miles, just like the Corvette, but the rears wore out a fraction faster, so the total is 725. So that leaves us with the overpriced Volkswagen. It may not surprise you to find out that this monstrosity has the worst tyre wear out of any car here, covering 295 miles on the front tyres and 465 on the rear. That leaves it with a rather pathetic final score of 527.5. So the Veyron is last, which isn't surprising. It's the heaviest, it's got all-wheel drive, and it's the most powerful. The SLR is better, but its weight, its highly effective brakes, and very large pile of torque are asking rather a lot of the tyres. The big Lambo is marginally better thanks to making its rears last longer. The Viper and Gallardo tie, though the Viper is friendlier on its front tyres while the Gallardo is better on its rear tyres. The Audi R8 is next, being quite kind to its rears. The Ford GT just beats it to score 1 point. The Ford is quite good for front tyre wear, but the rears don't stretch very far at all. The Alfa Romeo 8C and Porsche 997 also tie, but for the sake of the point system I will rank the Porsche higher of the two simply because it is cheaper. Now we get into the top 5 with the TVR Tuscan. It has the second best front tyre wear rate, but the rear tyres don't last very long at all by comparison. Narrowly beating it is the Ferrari 430, which is slightly heavier on its fronts but slightly friendlier on its rears. Beating that is the Carrera GT, which has the best front tyre wear here, but it's very average on the rears. The two leaders though are almost inseparable. The Enzo and the Corvette both behave very similarly with very good front tyre wear and the best rear tyre wear here. At this point, it's probably worth mentioning I have tried to drive every car here as smoothly as possible without giving up too much pace. I've made a point of not spinning the wheels or sliding if I can help it. It's also worth mentioning that the tyre wear will change depending on your setup. Most of these cars have a similar setup to each other, but some have ballast weight to the front for stability and some have it on the rear axle to help with traction, which will slightly alter the wear rates from front to rear. The Enzo particularly has a lot of front ballast just to get the performance point rating down, so you would find that the front tyre wear rate will actually be better if you decided to go for a less powerful build with less ballast. Either way, we have an unlikely win for the Chevrolet Corvette, which brings it up to 5th place overall behind the hypercars. Another points haul for the Tuscan brings it just ahead of the Ford GT, despite the Ford scoring points in almost every test. The Enzo is very nearly level with the Veyron now, while the poor Audi R8 is still trailing in last place. And as usual, the Corvette is still the only car to score points in every single round. So that was episode 4 of the mid-2000s Supercar Shootout. Join me next Friday for the next episode of the Shootout. Is there any test you want to see carried out on these cars whilst in their 700 performance point guise? Let me know in the comments below. Did you enjoy this video? then please do like, subscribe, and smack my bell so that you get notified of my future uploads. Take care of yourself, and ta-ra.